Welcome to the Tailoring Talk Show with me, your host, Roberto Revilla. I'm a bespoke tailor, menswear designer, and owner of Roberto Revilla London Suit, Shirt and Shoemakers. It's the podcast where you drop in for the threads, but often leave with something quite unexpected. We'll meet self-starters and creators to learn about their journeys, the highs and lows, and the lessons they've learned along the way. Please support the show by subscribing, and if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it helps so much if you take a few seconds to rate and review the show. Today's guest is a trauma-informed coach, professional singer, and keynote speaker. Founder of the Fearce Academy, she helps people build resilience to fear and manage mental health so they can radiate confidence in front of any audience. Currently studying psychology, she'll be publishing her first book later this year. She's here to show us how to turn fear into fuel. Tailoring Talkers, let's give a warm welcome to the amazing Janey Brown. Janey, how are you?
I'm great today. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So I was actually kind of slightly nervous about today because they say you never meet your heroes. And I get to meet one of my heroes today. Your Instagram account, I don't know if you realize this, but it's so important to so many people that follow you, I'm sure. It definitely is to me. It's, as someone who is an entrepreneur, has got 200 things going at any one time, has suffered various mental health problems in the past, had a rough upbringing, all the rest of it. I won't, my listeners are all reaching for their tiny, tiny little violins right now because they've all heard it before. But your Instagram feed is one that I check into every so often. And there is always something that is so valuable that touches something that's going on that just helps me to get through whatever it is. So I wanted to start off by saying a huge thank you to you for just putting what you put out there, because I know it helps me. And if it helps me, it must be helping thousands and thousands of people around the world.
I mean, that's so meaningful to hear. I really, really appreciate it. I'm blown away that that's how you feel. And I really do try to put as much intention into each of my posts as possible. I know that Gary V or someone like that would say, don't be so romantic with your content. Kind of, it's more about volume and quality than it is just about these like singular sort of intentional pieces. But it's just not how I roll. Like it's, if that's going to cost me some growth or whatever in my account, it is what it is. Like I really do want to share my heart in all my posts. So it's meaningful to hear that, because it means that at least there is one person that is feeling, moved by the content or helped in some way,
Yeah. I think it also helps people to understand that you are actually, they get to know you through that content, the way that you do put it out. It's not kind of just vanity, kind of self-promotion or whatever. It doesn't come across that way, which I think is really important. If you're someone who's a mental health advocate and you're trying to help people to overcome fear and so on, it actually helps if you come across as someone who's coming from a place of actually wanting to help people, rather than someone who's, doing it because there's another agenda at play, right?
Right.
Which, I think people do kind of start to feel these days with, I'm trying to think of other public speakers that I don't listen to, but Tony Robbins and not Gary V, the other guy, Grant Cardone and people like that, who these days are now starting to come across as self-serving to a degree. But you are totally not that at all. I also just appreciate your other talent. You are so talented, it's crazy. We do not have enough time to cover everything that I would ever want to cover with you today. I do have some of your tracks, and particularly the ones that you've also guested on other people's tracks, Adam Cooper stuff, like some of his remixes and stuff.
Okay, yeah.
Some of my like Stay Cool, Be Cool, Don't Worry About Shit playlists.
That's so cool. That's an old track. So that's very impressive that you found that one.
Yeah. No, totally.
I think he's from the UK too, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
With a name like Adam Cooper, it kind of sounds kind of like he might be from Stepney or somewhere like that. That's a place in London, by the way.
Okay, good to know.
So you're calling in from Canada?
Yeah, Toronto, Ontario.
Awesome.
The big six. Yep.
The 521st Canadian on the show.
I'm honored.
I've had lots of you. I love you guys. We talked about that in our pre-talk. Currently, you're still currently studying psychology?
Yeah, I'm almost finished my degree. I'll be graduating in the fall. And yeah, I'm super excited about it. It's been a long journey. I never thought I would go back to university. I never thought I would have a university degree. I didn't think I was even capable of it for a long time. So it's been a ride.
Awesome. So for those listening who don't know you and don't follow you, and aren't sort of fangirling over you like I am, take us take us back, just give us a little flavor of how you kind of got to, this chapter in Janey's life today, because you weren't always, well, I don't know if you even are nowadays, and you've just developed all these tools for kind of coping, overcoming, and so on, but you weren't always the hyper confident individual that we all see before us today, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Okay, so when I first started performing, I jumped onto my first stage at age 10, actually. And in those years, I was what you would consider fearless, like without fear, right? And fear is learned. So that makes sense. Like I didn't have any context of like what I would even need to be afraid of on stage. And so for the first like 3 years of performing, till age 13 or 14, it was this, liberating, free, wild experience. And then I hit high school, and all of the insecurities that go with being a teenager in high school kind of came to my life, bad skin and body issues and body image issues, let's say, and like whatever, like all the insecurities. And it translated into me being afraid on stage, like me being more insecure on stage, and me having some, more it just didn't feel as free. It felt more constricting and limiting. And there was just a lot of anxiety around that. And that was kind of the beginning of me having stage fright and me experiencing stage fright for like, 15 years.
Yeah.
And it was really, really problematic. Like it wasn't just butterflies. People kind of say, well, isn't that, part of being a performer? Like you get butterflies, and mine were more like tiny vampire bats with machetes. I stole that from one of my clients who was trying to overcome stage fright, and that's how he described it. So it's like very much in the line of like chronic stress and very much stage fright in every sense. And that was so bad eventually that it started to degrade my mental and physical health. I mean, it was definitely already degrading my mental health, but it started to catch up with me physically. And that was sort of this turning point for me where I got into therapy and started to do trauma certifications and started to educate myself on mental health. And the mental health in, the public sphere was more of a conversation, and the stigma, rah, rah, rah. So that was, kind of all happened at the same time. And eventually I decided that I was going to take all of the knowledge that I had as a performer over the last 20, I think at the time it was 20 years. And then all of the knowledge I acquired through my education and all of the knowledge I acquired through my wellness career, which was also kind of running parallel to my music performance career. And I decided to put together a program that helps people manage stage fright. And that's the journey of me managing my own stage fright, was sort of the foundation of the process that I now offer in my courses and in my coaching. And sort of that's kind of how I am here in a nutshell. Lots of details left out, but to be concise.
Yeah, no, absolutely. By the way, you don't have to be concise on this show. You go into as much detail or as little as you want. Having lived through all of that, overcome it yourself, when you're working with performers, and it's not just performers you work with, right?
Correct.
But then you're able to kind of really get down, roll your sleeves up and get down there with them and understand exactly what they're going through. It's you're the best type of coach is always the one that kind of does the work alongside you or has walked the path that you're about to tread yourself.
Totally.
Turning fear into fuel. See, fear, hang on, did I just say that the right way around? So
yes, yes.
but telling everyone in our pre-talk is like turning, Janey's thing is turning fear into fuel. And all day I've been getting it wrong, saying turning fuel into fear, which, completely counterproductive for what we want to try and help you with today. Fear is something that crops up all the time, right? Like,
yes.
You take just an average day, the number of times you're in a situation where you have to overcome something, and it can be something quite minor. And we deal with it because we're on autopilot, like crossing the road or, avoiding your next door creepy neighbor or whatever. You kind of just look around and there's situations people are kind of having to think twice about before they step forward to do something. Where do you start with all of this?
Yeah. The first thing that I like to do, let's say if I'm educating people on fear or, even just dealing with it myself, is to differentiate imminent threat and imagined threat. Imminent threat is when the amygdala of the part of your brain that senses threat perceives that you are actually in life or death danger. So, there's like a wild dog on the loose, right? That's going to inspire fear, and it's merited. And in fact, if that fear comes about, you don't want to like sit down and meditate it away. You want to like run and take action and do what you need to do to keep yourself safe. So imminent threat it's this real life or death threat. And we need to pay attention to that and cater to that in a way that protects ourselves. Imminent threat, it's still a perceived threat. Like the stimuli is still real, but it's not life or death. It's sort of this it's like, okay, I'm perceiving threat as I step into this interview with my boss and ask for a raise. I'm perceiving threat when I step on stage. I'm perceiving threat when I go on audition or go to tryouts or ask someone on a date. That's a huge one.
Yeah,
it's a
absolutely
huge perceived threat. And so the imagined threat, let's say, both are perceived threats, but the imagined threat, for lack of better way to describe it, is just this non-imminent threat. And when you can differentiate the two, you can start to work with the imagined threat. You don't want to work with the imminent threat. You want to cater to that immediately. But the imagined threat, that is where we have room to sort of, dissect it and work with ourselves and our nervous systems and our minds on facing it. And that's what we want to do ultimately. With the imagined threat, we want to face it. With the imminent threat, not so much, because that could, harm ourselves or it could threaten our lives. But with the imagined threat, you want to face it in some way, or it will always haunt you. And for me, I didn't face it. I pretended it wasn't there and I buried it, and it eventually, destroyed my mental and physical health. So there's a way to live with consistent and persistent imagined threat and not deal with it. Sure, there's a way to do it. It's just not ideal, and it will catch up with you one way or another. If you run from it, it'll follow you. If you bury it, it'll eat you alive from the inside out. Really, the only way to, I think, overcome fear is to face it and to go through it. So that's kind of where I would start with the fear conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so clear and simple. Imminent threat versus imagined threat. And if you to use a little, so when you were talking about, one of the examples of imagined threat, going into an interview, going in to see an interviewer, right? Which is imagined threat. It can become imminent threat if you walk into the interview room and the guy's got a gun in his hand and is pointing at you. Right?
Totally. Yeah.
So we are literally talking about, what's the situation? Is it literally going to kill you? And if it is, you need to do something about it. Your body's natural caveman mentality, fight or flight, whatever, it all kicks in, and you run away from it. Imagined threat is like, okay, well, it's not going to kill me. Okay, great. Once you've got that realization, then it becomes something that is potentially manageable. I'm not going to say it's manageable, because again, I presume there are a lot more steps that you then need to start going through. But it's having that initial realization first of all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's complex. Like the conversation around imagined threat is complex. It's complex. And I like that you just said, it could become imminent if, for example, there's like, you walk into an interview and the person has a weapon. The other thing to consider is that why is imagined threat even a threat? Like, why do we perceive interviews, asking someone on a date, stepping on stage, like, why does our amygdala perceive that as a threat at all? And from my research and my understanding, it comes down to this core collective fear, which is the fear of rejection. And this is no small thing. Like, this is no like thing to wave away. Oh, it's just the fear of rejection. Like, that's something I should be able to like mentally override. The fear of rejection is actually quite potent because it's connected to the fear of, like loneliness. It's if we, back in the caveman days, if we, got separated from our tribe, that meant death. And even in this lifetime, like forget ancestral sort of points of view, even in this lifetime, like when we're born and we're a baby and we're a blob and we can't take care of ourselves, like we rely on human connection to survive. So it's embedded in our nervous system, in our genes, like from an epigenetic standpoint, like we need human connection to survive, both physically, especially in the early days of our life, but also emotionally. And so if rejection threatens the concept of loneliness, what's actually fascinating about that is that actually becomes an imminent threat as well. So even though it's not immediately going to kill you, over time, if you are, if you do experience long-term loneliness, we've seen tons of research come out on, how deadly that is. And how deadly it can be, or how disease prone someone with long-term loneliness can be. So that's kind of a twofold realization, is just, okay, well, we actually are perceiving this threat because of this concept of rejection, which is a part of life in which we need to learn to cope with. And that's where I come in. But also, like, long-term loneliness is a real thing. And even though we're saying, quote unquote, this is imagined threat, it's not to be waved away. It's to be dealt with still.
Once you kind of work out that a threat is imagined, I guess the mechanism for then kind of pushing through would be different depending on the individual, right? Because there wouldn't be a one-size-fits-all solution for then, okay, so you're on block 1. You need to get to block 2, whatever block 2 is, whether you're a salesperson that needs to pick up the phone to make a cold call, or you're someone who has to give someone some bad news, or you're trying to ask someone out on a date. Getting off that first rock is going to be different from everybody. I mean, for me personally, I suffer from it a lot. There'll be people listening right now that will be laughing because they're like, what? You're not scared of anything. Newsflash, people. I'm human too.
Yeah.
When I do finally just push myself through that glass barrier, okay, fine, right. Okay, so whatever it is, what's the worst that can happen is always the question that I ask myself. And then I'm like, actually, do you know what? Let's just get on with it and just see what happens. That's how I then break the glass and push through to the other side. Am I making sense here?
Yeah. Yep.
Right. But then for other people, it's going to be different. How do you kind of work out what it is for each individual that you're dealing with? When you gave an example earlier of one of your clients had said that for him, stage fright was like, sorry, what was it? Vampire bats with machetes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so cool. That's so visceral. Like, you can really imagine these angry, mean-looking little bats. I love
cutting
animals,
up your stomach. Yeah.
Yeah. Cutting up your stomach. Yeah, like, oh no, hang on. What's a machete? That's a chainsaw. I was imagining even worse. A machete is like a huge knife.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, when he said that to me, it was, it's, as a coach, you learn from your clients all the time. And when he said that to me, I'm like, that's such a perfect description, because it's kind of the antithesis of like butterflies. Like butterflies are a healthy stress. It's a healthy nervousness. It's a bit of adrenaline to kind of, get the task completed. But when it becomes unhealthy, when it becomes a chronic stress or even a trauma response, that's when it feels sort of like the bats, right? And your question was like, how do you? So where do you start with people?
Yeah, because I was just thinking it's different for everybody, because like stage fright. So let's deal with stage fright, for example, right? So for me, I was a drama and theatre arts grad. Performed on stage so many times. You always get stage fright. Stage fright for me, or kind of anything really, whether it was asking a girl out on a date or whatever, it was never really anything that was inside me that I could, kind of give you a metaphor for or analogy or whatever. It was more I'm standing here and there's this space between us, and I could, whatever it is. So if you're on one side of the room from me, I can see that. But then just in front of you, to me, it feels like there's just this darkness across the room where I need to kind of get to. And there's something lurking around in that darkness.
Yep.
Rather than anything that's inside me.
Right. But, and I guess the follow-up question to the darkness and something lurking is, how does that make you feel? Because that's that implies, fear, anxiety, so on and so forth. So I guess it's like, regardless of what, the imagery is, and I love the imagery that you just gave. I think that there's probably a lot of people that would resonate with that. It's like, regardless of what the imagery is, there's still these like core sort of feelings. Your cat's beautiful.
Yeah, Frankie's just popped
Soothing.
Up, everybody.
Yeah. So with respect to where do you start with people? Since the root feeling is fear or anxiety, there's sort of a number of different tools that will be applicable to kind of every human. One is understanding how to calm the nervous system down. This is not going to be new news, but deep breathing exercises, like, different movement activities that can help the body interpret that it's safe. And that can then help throw a wrench in the sort of spiraling of thoughts. They both play into each other. There's arguments that, people are sort of saying, like, you always have to address the problem from a somatic sense first, AKA you always have to deal with the body first, then the mind. Others argue mind, then body. And I'm saying it depends. Actually, you do need to address both. That's for sure. You can't just address the body, because the mind is a real thing that we all have to deal with. And you can't just address the mind, because if the body is out of sorts, then that's going to keep affecting the mind. So you do need to address both, but which one comes first is up for debate as far as I'm concerned. I think a good starting place is taking deep breaths, you making sure that your breath is under control and focusing on that, because that's a meditation in and of itself.
Yeah.
But something that I want to...
Sorry to interject. That's something that I learned from you.
Oh, awesome.
No, that is what I do. Like, even yesterday, I was in a situation and I was on the bike on the way to see somebody, huge anxiety issues over it. And I just listened to myself for a second. And then I just I was like, okay, the one thing I can focus on right now and I can control is my breathing. And that's what I did. It was like deep breath, hold, out, hold, in, again, and just kept doing that. And then all of a sudden, everything else that was going on in my body that was a response to, this situation that was coming up and so on, my heart was racing, etc. That kind of shadow in the foreground with this thing lurking around there, all kind of started to slowly just disappear away. And then everything was kind of fine afterwards, because I was then able to kind of calm myself down enough to then start asking myself all the questions like, this isn't going to kill you, dude. In fact, what you're doing right now on the bike is probably going to kill you, not that.
Right.
Or
like lightning or something. Yeah. No, totally. When your body is more calm and your nervous system is is in a state of homeostasis, like, you're able to find more clarity with your thoughts, like your mind. Yeah. Again, the body and the mind work in tandem. And so it makes sense that was helpful for you. And also the movement on the bike, like, that generates out sort of excess energy, nervous energy that, on one hand, it jacks up your heart rate and gets, hormones and adrenaline and things pumping faster, which can affect the mind. But on the other hand, it also expels sort of this nervous energy, which can be helpful. So, the movement might have actually been helpful for you, like on your bike, and then the breathing to follow up is, I think that's a great combination. I think a caveat here would be to include the fact that someone's response to imagined threat will be intensified if they have some type of trauma in their past. So with respect to imminent threat, that could be a mixture of a natural disaster or a a human disaster. So an imminent threat could be an earthquake. It could also be, an altercation with someone. With imagined threat, you can absolutely imagine natural disasters, and that can create anxiety. But arguably more often than not, the imagined threat is oriented around some type of a relational dynamic. So getting on stage, the relational dynamic is being rejected by the audience, asking someone on a date, being rejected by that person, asking the boss for a raise, being rejected. And so if someone has relational trauma rooted in their past, then relational imagined threat is going to feel intensified. And that will require a bit of a different approach and a bit more work around, the potential relational trauma and the dynamics there. Like that might even require someone to, in my opinion, it would require someone to go to therapy if they have relational trauma, of course. But it will, so it's like, where do you start with someone that has these imagined threat responses and these fear responses to go with it? It's like, well, if it's just imagined threat and it's, not tied to trauma, then, there might be a lot more tools that'll be a lot more effective sooner in that person's journey. But if they actually, in fact, have relational trauma rooted in their past, then those wounds are quite deep. And, there's just a lot more work to be done there. So I think that's worth mentioning is that, relational trauma can really impact stage fright. And it did for me. And that's probably why I had it for so long, because I didn't address the relational trauma in my past. And there was really nowhere for me to go,
Yeah. There's also, God, I went to therapy, and it was because, talking about relational, it was because of my parents. So a lot of my kind of fears and things that were holding me back were because of things that my parents had taught me, told me, conditioned me to believe growing up through childhood. It's usually that you can't, or you won't be able to type kind of conversations and affirmations that, well, certainly my parents give me. I know that other people, probably have had similar things as well. And so for me, there was no amount of trying to develop exercises or whatever to overcome it. I had to go and get deeper help to kind of get through that. And also part of it, I think sometimes, is when you've got trauma that comes from that sort of place, if it's something physical that you can literally remove from your life, then sometimes that needs to happen as well, right?
Big time. Yeah, absolutely. Different relationships that, if they are not changing and you are, like, yes, it's a thing. You outgrow relationships. It's not to say to throw away your friends. I don't, our friends are not going to be perfect. They're not going to be able to serve us perfectly and vice versa. But if there is someone who's unchanging, unmoving, and it's toxic, like you do have to move on from that. And just to piggyback off what you were saying, like, these deep core beliefs that were formed in your developmental years, like the deeper and further back a negative or maladaptive belief is, the more laborious it's going to be to quote unquote reframe it, right? Like there's this buzzword of reframing beliefs and reframing your mindset. And there's merit to that. Like, I'm not trying to trash it. It's just to say that, like, it's not always going to be this like, oh, like, I had this thought and I said this thing about myself. Let me reframe that and say it this way. Sometimes that works on a dime, but if you have these deep rooted beliefs and core wounds that formed in childhood, it's going to be, a lot more laborious to quote unquote reframe that. And it will take more sort of like cognitive behavioral approaches, like Albert Ellis's ABCs and, reframing beliefs that way and stuff. As opposed to just like, let me literally phrase that differently in my head. It's like, no, I need to like sit down and go through a workbook, like with this belief, and have therapy and,
the deep rooted thing is really important, because it's like, again, if you, take the literal example, roots of a tree, right? You got to get down there to change things. Picking a leaf off isn't really gonna, like you were talking about reframing. It's like picking a leaf off a tree. That's not really going to do anything. The leaf will just grow back the next day.
That's right.
If you want to make real change, you got to get underneath. You got to get right down there.
Absolutely. I love that analogy and that metaphor, because it's like, if it's like, yeah, if it's a weed, or like a leaf, it'll grow, or there's many other leaves just like it. You could also look at it as if like, if it is just a surface level thing, you can pluck the leaf away and then the leaf is gone. And yeah, it's as easy as that. But both kind of metaphors or ways to look at that metaphor work. It's a really great example for sure. Like the deep rooted stuff is all the way down there, and you have to like dig and like, carve away the the mud, and like, oh, the root still goes down further. Okay. And like keep going, and oh, it's still going down further. And yeah, it's a process. It's a lifelong journey, uncovering sort of the maladaptive beliefs that were formed in childhood, particularly like for people who have childhood trauma. It's a lifelong journey. People who don't have childhood trauma, that's a completely different process,
For me, a lot of my trauma, as you've now guessed, is through childhood stuff and, parental abuse, all that kind of stuff. I got estranged from my parents because it just got to a breaking point where I just couldn't take it anymore. So I just had to get out. We didn't talk for, it was well over a decade. And we reconnected in recent years. As much as I think they would love to kind of have us integrated into each other's lives, I've gone over a decade of growing up, becoming a person, meeting, my wife. And so, my plate pretty much is kind of full. And then them coming back into my life, there's not really any room for them, never mind the fact I don't really know how to. But then there are little things that just remind me of, like, I was having a conversation with my dad like a couple months ago. I came off the call and I was so angry. Like, we were out, we like to just take some time out and just go into the woods with the dogs and, just kind of reconnect with nature and cut off from technology, all that sort of stuff, and just be present.
Mm-hmm.
During that, my dad called. By the end of that conversation, I put the phone down and I was literally redlining. Like, Janey, I was so angry. And
I get it.
Part of me was like, Jiminy Cricket on my shoulder was like, come on, dude, what's wrong with you? You're not this person anymore. Like, why are you getting so angry? It's just the way he, and Carolina was saying to me, what is wrong with you? And I was like, every single time I speak to him, the conversation starts off well. And by the end of it, I feel like I'm that same 6-7-year-old kid that's getting knocked around.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do this anymore. I then go back to, right, okay, well, if I don't really have much room in my life for that sort of thing, and it's not just family stuff, certain friends, all that kind of thing as well. I've just got to physically remove it and take it out of there. And that really hurts. But then you get extra fear that creeps in, because it's people will say to you, they're your friends or it's your family or whatever. You shouldn't do that. You should always find a way to. And I'm just like, well, some situations just can't be helped. So, I've got two choices here. Is either I go the rest of my life always kind of going through this seesaw of emotions and I don't like it. I choose me. And then you get the fear of feeling like you're being a selfish person, that you're not allowed to have compassion for yourself. And I know this is something that you have talked about. It's taken me a long time to get to a place where I'm just, again, I'm like, screw it. Do you know what? If you think I'm not a compassionate person because I'm taking care of myself, well, screw you. That's your problem. It's not mine. I've got people in my life who, if I don't take care of myself, if I don't have enough love for myself, then I don't have any of those things to give back to anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's important to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's complex. It's so complex when, the source of trauma in childhood is parents. And it's very complex when the parental figure isn't like a full-on monster. Like if a parental figure is a full-on monster, none of it is easy. Let me be clear, but there's sort of this ability to kind of go, okay, they're a monster, like they're just evil, and I never have to see them or think about them again. And they kind of just get put in this like box, right? And then, but if there's qualities to them that were loving, or qualities to them that like, that you were loved, or you're seeing changes in them, it's very challenging because you sort of feel compelled to keep them in your life. And I don't think there's a right or wrong way. Like every scenario requires nuance, and every case is different. But it's very challenging to, I mean, like, you're gonna be triggered if the source of your trauma is in your life. Even if they're different, you're gonna be triggered, and then you'll be triggered by the fact that you're triggered, like angry at yourself for being angry, and I've forgiven, and and then it's definitely not helpful when that parental figure is kind of trying to blame you, or like, oh, why aren't you letting this go? And trying to kind of make you feel guilty or shameful for putting your own needs first, because maybe they were really used to, having you put their needs first. I think for me, one of the things that's been helpful for, whatever, like moving forward with people that I love, that I'm not going to give up on. And again, every person is different. Like, if someone feels the need to be estranged from their family, like, I'm not going to judge them. It's everyone's different. Like, everyone had a different experience and has different reasons that they might need to do that. No one should really be commenting on, oh, you should always try to make it work. I don't believe that. But in my case, I think that the people from my past, I do believe that there was a future for us. And one of the things that was so important for me was just allowing myself to be angry and not judging it. Like, what you just described was like, I was, whatever, in the woods or whatever. And like, I was angry, and like, my partner was like, what, like, why are you, you know what I mean? Like, don't even question it. It's like, I'm angry for a biologically correct reason. And I might not logically understand that, but there is a reason for it. I don't need to project it onto anyone. I don't need to blame anyone, but I am allowed to feel this, and I should allow myself to feel this. So on one end of the spectrum, it's like, I'm allowed to feel my anger. On the other end of the spectrum, it's like, I'm allowed to feel compassion for them without over-identifying with their pain. So compassion is found through understanding, right? Like, well, I understand that they're this way because they were treated like this, this, and this. But that doesn't mean you need to grieve this, this, and this for them. They need to do that. Respectfully, here's your grief for you to take care of. But for me, I always found there was like this kind of, I needed to have this balance between, I'm allowed to feel angry and I'm allowed to understand and have compassion at the same time, without over grieving for them or without blaming them. So it's like, blame is past anger, and over identifying and grieving someone else's story is past compassion. Yeah. So it's like staying in the frame of compassion, staying in the frame of anger, and together, the dance between the two is what allows me to find forgiveness. Like, that to me it's like, I can't forgive when I'm blaming, and I can't forgive if I'm grieving their story for them, because it's too much. And then I'll just go back to blaming. Yeah. So let me have my anger. I don't necessarily always logically understand it. I might never. Doesn't matter. I'm angry, and I'm just going to be allowed. I'm just going to allow that. And I'm also going to allow having compassion for their story, because they do have one. They probably were treated like shit, even worse than us, maybe, I don't know. But I'm going to take the two, I'm going to dance between them. And then I'm going to, one day at a time, practice forgiveness, because it is a practice and it's ongoing. And tomorrow I might not be able to forgive, but today, if I can just stay between those two goalposts, I can maybe find forgiveness. And forgiveness, by the way, doesn't mean forgiveness and now we're having lunch together. It could mean forgiveness from afar. But forgiveness is for you. It's not for them. And any attempt to build a future with these people is also for you, not for them. Even if it's like, oh, it makes them feel better that I'm in their life, that's still a you thing. And it should still be a you thing. Yeah. So yeah, that's my take on that.
I'm smiling now because you said something that I actually learned from Ted Lasso a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you've seen that show.
That's awesome. I haven't, but I keep hearing so many good things.
So he's a football coach. He's an American. So he comes to the UK to manage a fictional Premier League team. And the series is not actually, I was trying to explain to one of my co-hosts on Play Pause Turn, another podcast that we do. And Mark was like, I tried Ted Lasso because we were all raving about it. I mean, everyone's, it's like the biggest show on Apple TV Plus. And he was like, I tried it, but I don't get it. And I just couldn't get into it, even though I like football. So it's a bit weird that. And I said, Mark, the show's not actually about football. It's about people and relationships and so on. Anyway, there's one of the players who is like, his name's Jamie Tart, and he's an idiot, basically. That's how he comes across when the show starts off. But as the show progresses, season after season, you realize that, he's got an abusive father, and there was a lot that was going on as he was growing up and so on. And to cut a long story short, basically, spoiler alert, anybody who's not kind of up to date with Ted Lasso yet, so just switch off right now if you don't want to hear this. Ted says to Jamie, forgive your father. And Jamie says, look, he doesn't deserve it. And Ted says, it's not for him. Mm-hmm. It's for you. Mm-hmm. And that was so powerful. And that's why I was smiling when you said that, because, Ted Lasso probably got it from Janey B, right?
Yeah, and Janey B got it from like some like sage in, Taoism or whatever. Like, it's an age old, definitely not my idea. It's age old, but I could not hear it enough. And I'm sure that's true for so many people struggling with like past resentment that goes really deep. Like, you can't hear it enough. Forgiveness is for you. And I think it's just that I think people get forgiveness confused with over grieving, or that they think that if I have forgiveness, I can't feel angry ever again. It's like, no, you allowing and validating your own emotions has nothing to do. It actually like facilitates forgiveness. Like, you allowing anger and you allowing, compassion facilitates forgiveness. It doesn't, but it is a practice. It's like, you're going to be triggered, especially if those people are in your life again. Yeah, you're going to be triggered. Like, it's not an easy ride to have these people in your life again necessarily, but it can be worth it. I'm not going to say it is worth it, because every situation is different, but it can be worth it. And it can be profoundly impactful for your own spiritual growth and for your own heart. Just your ability and your capacity to love and find compassion for others across the board. Like, it can be really impactful for that journey if that is something you prioritize in terms of a value.
Yeah. Wow, that got really deep, didn't it?
It always does.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm not. I think it's a great conversation. Really great conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of time for you, but also I don't want to let you go until we've talked about your book that is coming out later this year. So you're still working on it.
Yeah.
So tell me about the journey so how did that come about, and what's the process of writing been like for you?
Yeah. Oh man. So, okay. So I told you that I had a wellness career that ran parallel to so I was like performing and recording, etc., all these years. And then I was also teaching fitness and, taught fitness to professional athletes and mindset and meditation and so on and so forth. And at one point I realized like, I can't run these two careers like parallel anymore. I need to figure out a way to combine them. So that's when I came up with the concept of developing this kind of coaching program. This was in 2016, I believe. Mm-hmm. Let me create a coaching program for other artists and other presenters and other leaders that might be struggling with the very same thing I'm struggling with. Right. And basically I went to Costa Rica around this time because I was leading a wellness retreat. I was teaching yoga at a wellness retreat. And I piggybacked that retreat with like a bunch of travel, let me travel the country kind of thing. And that whole sort of trip, I was just writing and writing and writing, and one module after another. And long story short, finished the course, tested the course with the market for several years, and decided to turn the whole thing into a book. So that's kind of like how, like, technically that came about. The process of writing itself, the chapters or the modules or what have you, it really just came from the heart. Like I thought about the struggles that I experienced and I thought about the solutions I've found along the way and how I've processed it and how I've overcome it and what were the tactical things that I did to, manage this huge problem. And that's sort of the how the writing came about. It looks through the lens very much of shadow work. Like if I was to compare it to any type of figure that's already kind of walked the path, I would say Jungian psychology is a good comparison. It's very much focused on like, we need to face our dark side. We need to, look at our fears in the face. We need to discover our unconscious aspects and bring them to light before we can go anywhere. Like, yes, believing in yourself is important. Yes, reframing and positivity and, surrounding yourself with good vibes and stuff. It's all important. It's all valid, but we are always going to get snagged by our shadow if we don't face it and we don't integrate it. So that's the lens of the book. And that's the lens of my coaching at large. It's definitely got some like practical and pragmatic tools in it, but really like the focal point is let's actually look at ourselves. By facing our fear, we're really facing ourselves. And so let's dig into that. Let's, with courage, one little step at a time, learn to face that and integrate it. And one thing I'll mention, or let's say last thing I'll mention before I pass the mic back, is a lot of people, when they think about shadow work or hear, things like facing fears or facing the dark side, they think that they have to face this like really ugly, menacing, punishing, malicious almost like figure. Like they think that the dark side or the shadow is a monster, right? Like that wants to intentionally harm them. That's sort of how people interpret that. And actually the shadow is this really innocent, actually sweet part of ourselves, a really young part often, that has just been kind of banished to this unconscious aspect of ourselves so that we could survive. And all it's asking for is attention and love from us. And we are the only ones that can give it that love. It's not a monster that's trying to take you down that you have to like slay with some, like supercharged sword or whatever. It's an innocent, sweet part of ourselves that needs love and attention. And that is, even though, my book is called Fear to Fierce and it's very kind of powerful. The image on the cover is very powerful and you can see like my cheekbones and it's really like, just harsh. The whole approach is actually through compassion and self-compassion and self respect and authenticity and courage. It's very much that journey. So the inner critic is the one that's the monster like that. Yeah. The inner critic, the inner judger is the one that's like really, can get really ugly. And we deal with that too in the book. But at large, the core of the work is like finding our unconscious aspects and giving them love.
What if in overcoming whatever fear it is, whatever challenge it is, through that darkness, through those shadows, through that murky water, whatever it is for you, what if on the other side you didn't find a beast, but you just found that sweet, innocent child, that younger version of yourself that was fearless on the other side, just waiting to take your hand and just, tell you that you got this, you can do this. It's all okay. Wouldn't that be so cool?
Oh, it's a beautiful image. Like, I love how you just sort of like concisely summarized my explanation with that type of image. I mean, it's just, beautiful image, totally on brand, totally the vibe. I kind of look at it like this too. Like there's this, I think it's called like phases of learning or something. It's like you're unconsciously incompetent and then you're consciously incompetent and then you're consciously competent and then you're unconsciously competent, right? Like amazing way to describe like the learning phases. I kind of have my own version of that. It's you're fearless because you haven't learned to be afraid yet. Then you're afraid and then you're fierce. So it's like you're fearless, you're fierce, like fierce, F-E-A-R-C-E is it's the combination of your fearlessness and your learned fear and your learning of overcoming that. Like your sort of journey of integrating your fears, because we all have fears. We're all human. We always will have fear. Learning to face that and integrate that is the way to being fearless. It is the way to being consciously competent or consciously, unconsciously competent, right? Like fearlessness isn't the goal. That's when you haven't actually gone through the fire yet. That's because there's nothing to be afraid of, right? And not to mention, that's never going to be an outcome. Like we're always going to have fears. So fearlessness isn't the goal. It's to integrate your fears into your consciousness, into your way of being, so that you can become fierce. It's turning your fears into fuel through that process of facing them and integrating them.
Couldn't think of a better way to end this. JaneyBrown.com.
Yes.
Best place for people to go to find you, Janey? Aside from you need to go to your Instagram handle, it's at Janey B World, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's spelled Janey rather than the other way, whatever the other way is.
Was it the other way? It's like Janey I think.
Yeah, it's the way that Aerosmith spells it.
Yeah.
And Janey's got a gun.
Yeah. but definitely for those of you listening who are on Instagram, so it's at Janey B World, JaneyBWORLD. Go find her account, hit follow, and thank me later. By the way, the child on the other side of the ravine or whatever imagery, you can keep that for free.
Love that.
I warned you before the call, didn't I, that my head's Disney.
It's beautiful.
Janey, we got into some kind of deep stuff here. Thank you so much. You have been absolutely wonderful. Like everything that I hoped for and even more.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
Have you had fun?
Yes, this has been a great conversation. Really, really, really great. Yeah.
And for those listening, I don't know if the video of this, I guess the video of this will go out in snippets or eventually it will go out in a whole thing on the YouTube channel. But this is how much of a talented professional, an absolute trooper Janey is. She put up with, there was like about 10 minutes there where Frankie, my oldest cat, Janey was making some really serious points and this dude was trying to stick his ass in my face for like 10 minutes to get attention. And she just held it, like kept a straight face the whole time. Honestly, I don't know how you did it, because if it was me, honestly, I'd have fallen apart. So thank you for that.
I was aware of that. Like there was a part of me that was aware of it the whole time. Like, no, this needs to be said. I'm just going to plow through.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I mean, he was really doing he's now just given up. Here, look, here he is. I don't know if you can, on the Zoom, you can see, oh, there he is.
Oh, there we go. Okay, now he's chilling.
He's just kind of given up for now. Anyway, there we go. Janey, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you all so much for joining Janey and I on this episode. Don't forget Tailoring Talk is on Instagram at Tailoring Talk Podcast. You know I love feedback, so email me at tailoringtalkpodcast@gmail.com. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. And very important, use that share button in your player to send this episode on to people who you know might get some help or be inspired by Janey today. Janey's book will be out later in the year, and I'll make sure that I tell you all when it's available. And if you're enjoying Tailoring Talk and want to support the show, you can click the link in the show notes to buy me a coffee. Have a great week. Be good to each other, and I'll see you on the next one.